Fantastic. Okay, well, we'll get started now. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see you again for those who met before, and if not, see you and meet you for the first time for our seismic breakfast briefing. It's the 1st of December. For those of you who have advent calendars, I hope you've enjoyed diving into those this morning. And happy December. For those who we've not met before, my name is Olivia. I'm a sustainability consultant at Seismic, and at Seismic we are a sustainability advisory who are working to help businesses become a force for good in the world. I'm just going to pull up our slides, so thanks for bearing with me whilst we get that up for you. And at Seismic, part of our breakfast briefings, the purpose of this is that we believe strongly in bringing the business community together to learn about each other's sustainability initiatives and from one another. We really believe in the power of community. So do say hello, as Ramolka has in the chat. Let us know where you're from. That would be wonderful. Okay. Fantastic. So as I said, welcome to our December breakfast briefing. In our breakfast briefings, we aim for you to leave feeling inspired and informed on a top sustainability topic affecting businesses today. And today we're going to be talking more about how to action your ESG strategy. So as a reminder for those who we've not met before, we are an international team of sustainability experts on a mission to help businesses prosper by becoming increasingly impactful and influential forces for good. We're built on the principles of what it means to be a B Corp, and we use the B Corp framework to help organizations build their ESG strategy. And as a team, we bring together experts in net zero and sustainability strategy to help organizations lead the shift from a traditional primacy towards shareholders and profit generation towards prioritizing all stakeholders, both internal and external. Here are a collection of some of the clients that we've been so fortunate to have been working with since we started and supporting in their sustainability journey, to give you a flavour of the different organisations and industries that we work with. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Paul Lewis. Paul Lewis is the co-founder and CEO of Seismic, and he has over 20 years in advising and leading sustainability initiatives through a wide range of organisations. So over to you, Paul. Oh, I think you may be on mute.
That's the first mistake of the day. Thanks, Olivia. Good morning. It's great to see you all this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's a real pleasure to be talking about this subject, one which I have done for quite a few years now. I've been working in this sector for over 20 years. And throughout my career, I've always seen that there's, in fact, not only an opportunity, but responsibility for the private sector, for businesses to help lead us out of what's become an increasingly urgent need to move out of the environmental and social crises which we clearly find ourselves in. I think the fact that private sector is in the room today with a business community kind of really speaks to that. And I think there's so much more insight and opportunity for businesses to take that front foot. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. So really, there's an increasing amount of evidence, and I think it's some of which we're going to kind of share today, around the correlation between actually where there's authentic purpose and a desire from an organizational point of view to make a positive impact, whether that's socially or environmentally, and the correlation between that activity and actually the traditional measures of business success, including shareholder return. And what that looks like in practical terms really is threefold. Firstly, it's around the intentionality of a company's purpose, its mission, its impact, its vision. We're going to touch on that today, but mostly we're going to be focusing on the second and third area that is about putting a considered, impactful strategy together, and then putting the right structures and cornerstones in place to actually turn that into reality, turn it into action. And that's what this is all about, turning an ESG strategy into action. Purpose, vision, mission, just by the way, we will touch on it, but this deserves a breakfast briefing all of its own, if not more than that. And I'm glad we've got that scheduled in to our calendar early in the new year. So if we can go back to the slides, Olivia, that'd be super. Just to frame the agenda for today, when Olivia said I'm the speaker, I'm glad I'm not actually. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into two areas, but I'm delighted that we've got a good friend of Seismics and someone that I've known for quite a while, Connor Dalton, who's really who's going to be providing some great insights. Connor is currently the director of ESG Sustainability at CEF. CEF are the UK's leading multi-channel electrical distributor. And it's quite a new change for Connor. He was previously at Aldi and Sainsbury's in senior sustainability roles there. I've been really fortunate to have a front row seat working with Connor for a while and seeing him very expertly collaborate and get alignment internally with senior leaders, internal departments and external stakeholders to really turn sustainability strategy into action. So thank you in advance, Connor, for your contribution, which is in a few minutes. So I'm going to speak for 50 minutes or so with a little bit of help from one of my colleagues in a while on really why we need this inspiring ESG strategy and actually what makes a top tier strategy. So we're going to go into that in a little bit of practical detail. Before we get going, I've got a question for you. Which is, if we go to the next slide, Olivia, I'm going to ask you in a second by use of some clever polling technology, just to answer one question. Love to understand who's in the room in terms of ESG maturity. So from the organisation which you're representing today, are you on one end of the scale, say compliance only, you're driven by regulation, legislation, and that's really the only force that's making you act from an ESG perspective? The other end of the scale is, look, you know, I'm from a naturally purposeful and impactful business. Everything we do has the lens of impact and ESG. Love to understand where you are on that sliding scale. So Olivia, if we can launch that, that'd be super. There we go. So if you hit your score there, it'd be quite interesting to see who we've got around the room. Okay. Olivia, I don't know if we can see the results.
We've got a couple of results so far. I think people are taking time to select their answers. So if you submit a few more, we'll give you a bit more time and then share them back around with the group. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and hopefully you can see the results there. We may be experiencing some slight tech difficulties getting the results through, Paul, so
we can maybe look at them later.
We'll take a look at them later. Yeah.
Perfect. Oh, we live in suspense. Looking forward to that. Very good. Okay. Well, if we move on, I'd like to just start with it's interesting to start with a quote, and if we go on to the next slide, Olivia, thank you. Yeah, I think wherever we are on that scale, I think it's fair to say, Olivia, could we flip to the next slide? Thanks, lovely. I think it's all to say we're experiencing new challenges. You know, for our organisations, the pace of change is absolutely incredible at the moment, both in terms of technologies, in processes, in our case in the UK in government, and that is a real new paradigm which we find ourselves in. And I think this quote, it's a couple of years old actually, from the Harvard Business Review, but it really helps frame us today quite well. An organisation's ability to not only survive but thrive is really based on its ability to reposition itself and create a new future, not just adapt to it, but create a new future to itself. And you know, just Connor is doing exactly that at CEF right now, which I'm incredibly excited about, and really leverage a purpose-driven mission to that end. So I think that kind of brings us into where I think there's a trust point here. So if we go to the next slide, the Edelman Trust Report. Livia, could we flip to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah. The Edelman Trust Report is one of the most respected ongoing research entities in the world from a trust and society perspective. And there's been a huge shift from this graph on the left-hand side here indicates and shows you that business is more trusted from society than NGOs, government, or media. And that has been a significant shift. That's really telling. That's really telling. 2 years ago, 2020, May 2020, the graph on the right-hand side, government was more trusted than business. And there's this shift going on, which really, for some of us, that may not be surprising at all. But I think businesses need to understand this and sit up and take note. And it really heightens the awareness, perhaps, of the opportunity and responsibility for businesses to take that leadership perspective. I'm just going to go to the next slide, share some more perspectives with you now. We all like stats, but it's maybe starting top right. Investors are far more than ever looking at ESG performance as a key metric, key success metric in their portfolios. We do a lot of work in the financial community and private equity, and there's far more scrutiny, far more interest in ESG performance than ever before. It's a remarkable shift that we saw kind of coming in at the beginning of the pandemic, actually, the first wave, and you know that is increased throughout, and it continues to increase. Let's go to the top left, recruitment, whether it's millennials or other generations, those that are recently educated, coming out of education, coming into employment, are far more hungry to see values alignment, to see that an organization has a purpose that is aligned with their personal purpose. And that is something that we are seeing far more now. And in fact, value alignment and purpose is for many becoming more important than salary. And recruitment is really asking for more ESG strategy. Just going down to the bottom right. So from a consumer point of view, there's a real belief now that consumers want the businesses that they buy from to care and have actionable plans to help people and planet. No longer is it good enough just to want a great service or a great product. There needs to be this higher context. Consumers are saying that more than ever. And from a growth point of view, B Corp, as Olivia shared and many know in the room, we're a big advocate of the B Corp framework. It's an incredible mechanism to help businesses become a better version of themselves. And growth from B Corps, and B Corp really is a proxy to high level ESG performance. Growth is just higher in B Corps, and I think that's against the national average across that 8-year period. So hopefully this is good data. This is good data. It's good trends that enable us to, if there was any doubt in our organization as to the why that we need to build an ESG strategy, hopefully that puts that to rest. I'd like to share with you, firstly conceptually, and then in a little bit more detail, in my 20-year experience, what makes a top tier ESG strategy. Firstly, a little bit of a trend. If you can go to the next slide, Livia, thank you. 20 years ago, when I started out, there was a business strategy that sat, right at the core of the business, and an ESG strategy was simply a back of an envelope or a small area on the side of someone who was passionate about the subject's desk. But the two never really got together. The two were very separate. They weren't connected. And that meant that actually not a lot of action happened. And what we've seen particularly over the last 5 years, is that these worlds are starting to interconnect, which is vital, because without there being a relationship between business strategy and ESG strategy, frankly, nothing is going to get done from an ESG point of view, because the business doesn't care enough. And now we're seeing in this really interesting move that ESG strategy is, and it has to be, a subset of the business strategy in its entirety. More and more business strategies are using ESG metrics to help them judge performance of how well that business is progressing, right at the heart of it. And now we're saying, actually, if it's anything but this is really an opportunity missed. So if you could reflect on your own business, I just wonder where the ESG function, sustainability function and strategy sits in relation to the overall business. And now for some, we're seeing actually these two reverse, which is quite an extraordinary shift that we're seeing. And where, Olivia, if we can go to the next slide, the ESG strategy, there we go, yeah, the ESG, sorry, Olivia, yeah, that one there, yeah, ESG strategy is actually bigger, it's bolder, it's actually the context in which the business sits. One very well documented example of this year from our client Patagonia is for reasons I won't rehearse now, because we've all seen it in the media. They have shifted their ownership structure to the point where the business is serving a higher context, and their only shareholder in their language is the environment and the earth. And that's maybe an extreme case which we probably might not be able to envision our own businesses getting to in the short term, but it certainly does provide some inspiration for us. So if we now flip to the next slide, Olivia, thanks. And just looking at the foundations of an ESG strategy, there's 3 areas really. Firstly is ambition. This is about understanding and articulating the why of the strategy, the purpose, the vision, the mission, and making sure that it's aligned throughout the business. And once we've got the why set, then we move on to focus. And focus is really about understanding where we prioritize, really establishing where we are against that prioritization, and determining how we will deliver on that ambition. And the focus is really the what. So if ambition was the why, focus is the what of the strategy. And then we get into the how, which is the execution. This is about the allocation of finite resources to establish performance and metrics that help us articulate how we are progressing and to actually progress towards that clear vision, and putting in place the right mechanisms to help us govern and manage that. Okay, so I'd just love to go into each of these in turn. So just going to the next slide, we really are in ambition talking about the why. So firstly, this is about refining the mission, the vision and the purpose. I think for some, you will be completely satisfied in your own organizations that the mission, vision and purpose is true, authentic, it's purposeful, and it's pointing towards that positive higher context which you need it to. For some, that may not exist. Some of our most fulfilling work is actually working with organizations to help refine these and move leadership teams, moving to the top right of this slide, to a place of getting buy-in. And this concept of weighing into buy-in from a leadership point of view is really important. Getting them involved early to help articulate the why is vital. And we'll see in a couple of slides actually why that's so important when we get into the execution phase. Crucially, understanding where you are this bottom point on, your starting point is important, and being honest with yourselves around that, which is sometimes difficult in a commercial corporate setting, but really helping energize the whole team and the business around this being your day one. Okay, and whatever strategy you're looking to put in place, it's about looking forward from here without necessarily, looking backwards too much, but learning what we can from that. So if that in a nutshell, and of course we could spend a whole morning talking about these subjects, but just touching on them in the time that allows. If we move into the next stage of focus, so this is about defining the what, and the what is we advocate the B Corp framework, as I was saying. A really strong dual approach is to use a B Corp framework or another framework if B Corp's not right for you, and also a materiality assessment. And just touching on B Corp using the framework doesn't necessarily mean looking to certify as a B Corp, but it's really about using this open source IP that now nearly 200,000 companies are using worldwide. It's got an incredible approach, but it's the best framework I've seen in my 20-year career by far. And it really helps establish your baseline, helps you understand where you are, and a framework to really consult with relevant stakeholders, whether they're internal or external, making sure that stakeholders are consulted to really help you define where the focus should be is an absolute priority. And it's incredibly powerful when we get these well defined. An example, Sipsmith Gin, who you probably may know, based in London, very well-known gin brand that we've worked with. They're a B Corp, and using the B Corp framework, they have helped prioritize and focus what they're working on right now by defining that they want to increase their B Corp score by 25 points by 2025. And the work that they're doing to help understand and distill, excuse the pun, unintended, where they need to be focused is really impactful. So if you make everything the priority, then nothing gets prioritized. So prioritizing the what is super important in this context. And if we go now into the how, and again, I appreciate we're going at whistle stop speed here because there's a lot to get through, and I want to make sure we have time, a good amount of time with Connor. The how is really about rolling out what we have defined in our focus. So just looking at action plan and resourcing, how can we integrate into an existing program, something that I always advocate. We need to look at resources, we need to look at timelines and funding. If you have the leadership fully bought in at this stage, this becomes far easier. It becomes relatively easy because the leadership team have been with you through this journey of the why, the what, and now into the how. Governance is also, of course, so important. It's all about having clear accountability and transparency, and making sure you've got those structures in place is vital by this stage. And then, of course, engagement. Okay, so engagement is not only, you need to engage right at the beginning, of course, but if you've got that buy-in, we always find incredible amount of untapped or unrealized excitement or energy in the business for sustainability, and really using that as a force for good internally to help roll out and execute on your programs is something that we always advocate. An example of that, maybe if I can draw on, is a mid-tier accountancy company that we're working with, Blick Rothenberg. They serve some amazing companies internationally, and they are they're being very thorough and very conscious and intentional about their internal engagement. And I think for any partnership structure, I think that's an important one, but it's important nonetheless. And it's helping them execute on their program with very good effect. So engagement is something that should never be underestimated. And that leads me on to communications. Communications of sustainability and ESG is vital, whether you're talking internally to a business or externally. And if I can ask Olivia Hill, who's our head of sustainability communications, she's going to talk briefly about how this all kind of knits together in the context of ESG strategy. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Paul. Thank you. I'll be brief on this point, but we wanted to just flag the value of communications, because I think what has happened in the world of ESG is a contraction in terms of communications. People have become afraid to communicate because they fear the accusation of greenwashing. And actually, we have the fortune of coming from a place where, because we have a communications service entrenched within an ESG agency, it's based on genuine intention and actions that we would then recommend our clients to communicate. And if we go back to that stat that Paul shared earlier, that 76% of consumers think businesses have a responsibility to people and planet. If you don't communicate what you are doing for people and planet, you will be losing those consumers. And if we also think back to Paul's slide with the business strategy over here and the ESG strategy over there, I think that's often happened with marketing departments too. ESG over here, marketing over here, and actually therefore a struggle to communicate because you don't know enough detail. So actually keep them combined, keep them integrated, and you'll feel confident about what you can communicate. There are 3 points on this slide, which for me, I think are the most important things to consider when you are deciding to communicate what you are doing around your sustainability strategy. These also, I think, fit with that how, what, and why points. In terms of the how, it is all about the journey. Don't feel that you need to wait until you've achieved all your milestones, you've hit your sustainability goals before you can communicate them, because I'll let you into a secret. There is never an end point in sustainability. You will always be on a journey, and you will always therefore need to communicate it, which then inherently, if you're communicating your stages, which is where you are at, you will be being authentic, which is my second point, which is the what. And authenticity, it's a word that gets thrown about a lot. I hear things like speak to your truth. You know, they're all really essential, but actually, how do you do it? And I think if you communicate transparently about your targets as well as what you've achieved, then and doing so at the stages of your journey, then you achieve that authenticity inherently. And I think, talking to the point of that B Corp strategy, what it provides is a framework that holistically looks across your entire operational efforts, which means that you're not missing something. And that is where those greenwashing accusations come in. They're not, people often think about the definition of greenwashing as being a false communication of your sustainability efforts, and it is. But what it also is, it's nuanced. It's the neglect of the unintentional neglect of certain areas of what you're doing, and so you mistakenly communicate something. And if you are following a really robust framework like B Corp, it will look at all of your operations so that you don't mistakenly neglect something, which means that when you communicate your good news stories, you're also aware of what you're not doing and where you need to improve, and you're being transparent about it. Which leads me to my final point of backing it up, which for me is the how. Evidence what you are doing. And so long as you can evidence what you're doing with measurement across your operations and your supply chain, that you have the numbers to back up those stories that you tell, and I really believe in storytelling, but I would back it up with the evidence. And for me, that's often in the place of something like an impact report, which gives you the space to put your numbers in, to evidence, to show your examples. It gives you a structure like an annual report within terms of that sort of more corporate style of financial reporting to put all your evidence, which then means you have a place that you have publicly shared what you are doing and something you can refer back to that then allows you to build your wider communication strategy out from it in order to tell your good news stories, talk positively about the things that you want to, but know that you've got a core place where you are authentically and transparently sharing the journey that you're on. And an impact report is an annual one, so you then can constantly show the improvements and the next stages that you're getting to. So I'll stop there. There's lots that I can talk about, but I know that we want to hear from Connor, who we are thrilled to be working with on both your ESG strategy and how you communicate it. So it shows that the two really work as a dovetailed approach. So back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Olivia. Fantastic. And that kind of really brings it together, the kind of communication of this. I've just seen in the chat how international we are this morning. Warm welcome to everyone. It's wonderful to have such an international group today. I just following on from what Olivia was saying, I think one thing I'd highlight here, this is what we call the seismic shift roadmap, which many of our clients adopt. The point I'd like just to pull on here is that, you know, phase 2 is really what we're talking about here, the building the strategy and the action plan, whether or not it's using the B Corp framework. But whilst that's happening, it's so important that quick wins can be delivered. You don't need to wait until this strategic process is, you know, finite and polished and complete to actually crack on and deliver some quick wins, because, you know, what's been called, you know, what we've know the term of and been used for years is low-hanging fruit. Of course, you can you know, pick those off and work with those as quickly as you need to. If that's something that's an obvious thing that needs doing, then you can do it. But the important thing that it sits under this umbrella of a strategy that really is connected so cleanly into the heart of the business. Perfect. Before handing over to Connor, I'd like to share 2 more slides. One is looking at really what these are just what are the enablers and the inhibitors of action. Okay, so this is really useful for you to think about, perhaps in your context. This is drawn from our experience, from our research, but also we had a live in-person workshop actually last month, which was really fascinating, and there were some amazing minds and brains that came together to help distill really where the inhibitors are, what are the handbrakes that we have that we need to think about and overcome. And I know that some are in the audience today, so appreciate you may have heard this for the second time. I think there's a challenge for a lot of organizations, particularly with maybe a short-term, uncertain short-term economic outlook, that there is a short-term mindset. You know, that's an inhibitor. I think we need to be honest and open about that. I think sometimes, despite our best intentions and applying our best processes, there's a lack of buy-in or understanding from either internal or external stakeholders. You know, that's definitely a challenge that many face. And again, you know, I hope Connor will touch on this, but if that can be thought about really early in the journey, then there's less likely to have that as a inhibitor. Resources is always a challenge. We always want to do more, have more resources, to go faster, to do more. But unfortunately, you know, every strategy needs a budget, and not all resources are always available internally. So I think that just needs, you know, need to be clear about that. And I wouldn't want to set out a stall of a strategy without knowing I had the resources to be able to deliver on it. I think the complexity for some, and this kind of goes to the second point of understanding. I think there's a real challenge around the complexity of this landscape. It's changing incredibly quickly. You know, I think more has changed in the last 2 years than the 18 years previous in my career in this landscape. And we've got to be on top of that. And if we can't be, we need to have a partnership with an entity that can help us stay on top of the fast changing landscape here. So these are the kind of the main inhibitors. Thankfully, there's a few more drivers than inhibitors. And the drivers, if we can move to that, thanks Olivia, are about, this is really what is going to accelerate, where's the rocket fuel for our strategy that we should really lean on and leverage more. Really think about the personal why of people within our organizations. What is it that they can tap into on a personal basis? I think particularly if you're talking to CFOs, CEOs, really leveraging the voice of the customer is important. And thankfully, there's a lot of supply chain pressure now, which is causing suppliers to act pretty quickly around ESG. So customer pressure is something that we can leverage and understand more about. I think that's an important stakeholder group we need to tap into. Internal communications to build buy-in. Organizations have existing internal comms channels. We should leverage those. And to Olivia's point earlier, that's something that we can build on and activate resources through those channels. I think we always find there's at least one non-exec on the board who is a personal champion. And if we can understand that and we can harness that, then we can use that to leverage board buy-in. Collaboration on an industry basis for sure. I think the subject of ESG is something that we can be open about, and industries are open about. Evolve current roles to include ESG, absolutely. Many people have part-time in ESG roles and part-time in their own function. And then funding, access to investors. There's far more voice now coming from the funding community, as I touched on earlier. So these are the levers for action, which I hope that Connor can add some flavour to over the next few minutes. So I'm going to move aside now and move over to Olivia and Connor to have a conversation about Connor's wealth of experience.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Paul. And thank you so much, Connor, for joining us today. As Paul said at the top of the call, Connor Dalton is the Director of ESG and Sustainability at CEF, and also has a wealth of experience that he brings from working at Aldi and Sainsbury's as well. Connor, I've got a couple of questions to put to you to really tap into your experience and see if you have any advice or tips to share with the room about how you've actioned your ESG strategy, what challenges you found, and perhaps what things have worked well for you. So I'm going to start off with a challenging one, which is that we know normally, and particularly now, most stakeholders in organizations are very supportive of ESG and ESG strategies, but then nevertheless, you're always going to face some skeptical stakeholders. Have you ever had an experience of facing a skeptic? And if so, how did you manage that?
Thanks, Olivia. So yeah, before I get into that, I just wanted to say how much of a privilege it is to be sat here today amongst a large virtual room of so many experts. It's a real honour and quite a humbling experience, actually. So I just wanted to first of all say thank you to Seismic and for this opportunity. Yeah, really delighted to be here, and the presentation that we've just been through, lots to unpack there, which obviously we won't do now, but definitely some interesting information in there. And I think the framework that you use in terms of the ambition and the other aspects to that. I think the one bit that I would add to that would probably sit right in the centre of that wheel is people, because people at every stage in the journey are absolutely fundamental. And I know that the people elements are included within there, but for me, it's the crucial thing is not just the what you do, it's the how you do it. And the how you do it is very much reliant on the people aspect. So I love that the approach and the simplicity of it as well. In terms of tricky stakeholders, I've had a few. So similar to Paul, I've been in sustainability for the last 20 years. I spent the last 10 years in the supermarket sector. Prior to that, I spent my first 9-year career in the construction wholesale sector with Wolseley. And that was really when sustainability was really starting to take off. So I joined them as a graduate trainee on their programme, and eventually I spent 9 years there. So that's a little bit about me. In terms of the tricky stakeholder, I've got There's one that really stands out for me, and it was hopefully it'll resonate with some and hopefully give some tips and some value. And that was at Aldi when it was back in 2017, and the topic of science-based targets was really starting to come to the fore. And I was a member of our ESG committee, and I helped run that committee. And so on the committee was a broad range of different stakeholders. We had property directors, we had logistics, and we had a couple of our managing directors as well, who were effectively the chairs of the committee. And the two managing directors sat on the exec board, or the equivalent of that at Aldi, because it wasn't a PLC. So I had a slot on the agenda, and I was up, and I started talking about science-based targets and a little bit about the science of it, the rationale, the background, and talking about why this was important. So back to Paul's point, it's really trying to resonate that why should we as a business care about this? So I went through the presentation, and I got to the end of the presentation, and the managing director said to me, "Connor, this is all nonsense. This is not relevant for us. I don't understand any of this, and let's just park this." So you can imagine how I felt, because myself and my team and I had put weeks and weeks and months of work into this, and I was actually working with Paul and his previous business to help us, articulate that, and Paul actually sat on this committee as well, and so he knows firsthand what it was like, and with some real strong personalities, none more so than this managing director, who gave me this fairly harsh feedback and fairly blunt feedback. So it wasn't my finest day, and it was a challenge for me, because I was driving away from work thinking, right, today wasn't a day of winning, today is a day of learning. And I thought to myself, right, how am I going to overcome this? What can I do? And I thought long and hard about it. And I said, well, I'm not going to give up, because A, we really need his buy-in and support, and B, this is a really crucial strategic topic for the Aldi business, not just nationally, but internationally as well. And so I thought to myself, right, how am I going to get around this? So what I started doing is, when I saw this person in the business, in the canteen, in the corridor, I deliberately started to strike up more conversations with him. And for the first few months, I never mentioned science-based targets or ESG. All I was doing was trying to get to know him. And I found common ground, and the common ground was sport. I'm a huge sports nut. I love my football, and so does he. So I found a little bit of common ground there, and I thought, great, I've got that little bit of landscape where I can start to now just build a relationship with him. Now, that also helped me really understand him and his drivers and what was important to him. And over time, over months and months, and I had to cultivate this relationship for a long time, I started to realise how massively competitive he was. And I thought, right, I've found my in here. I've found the key to unlock him in our sustainability and ESG journey. Because once I realised how competitive he was and how highly thought of he was regarded in the business at national and international level, I thought, I've got the key here. The key here is to tap into that competitiveness and use that as a way to help drive and get science-based targets on the agenda again, and move things forward. So the way I started positioning to him, after months of getting to know him better, spending some time with him, talking to him at a very simple and basic level of science-based targets, because I had to look at myself and go, I pitched that wrong. I went in too complex. I went in a little bit too scientific. So I had to really bring it back to basics. And one of Paul's words earlier that's really true to how I approach it is simplicity, making things really simple, because it's a complex landscape. So I then started having conversations with him and really describing science-based targets at a really basic and simple level. But the way I really motivated him the way I positioned it with him was to say, look, as a business at a national level, we have a real opportunity to get in line with the leaders in our sector, i.e. the Tesco's, the Sainsbury's, etc., when it comes to science-based targets. we could really get that position. We could be the lead discounter in the supermarket sector. So I could see him starting to think, oh, okay, taking a leading position. The competition, the competitor in him was starting to go, okay, I quite like this. Then I also reinforced that by saying that Aldi globally, he sat on the global sustainability committee with all the other MDs responsible for ESG. And I was very mindful of that. And I said to him, we've got an opportunity here to lead the Aldi worldwide business on science-based targets. Again, tapping into that competitive nature. And he was starting to get really excited now because he was representing the UK and Ireland, and he's clearly very ambitious, and he wanted to help drive things internationally as well. And for me, a lesson I've learned in business is, to a certain extent, I don't really care why people are interested in ESG. It doesn't really matter to me. They've got different motivators. You know, finance people have got different motivators. People who work in your stores and branches have got different motivators. It doesn't matter. It's just about getting that hook. So that hook with him was the competitor piece. And he then, from over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, he went full 180 to our biggest skeptic, to our biggest champion. And to the point where we were putting forward recommendations to him on X, Y, and Z. And he was saying, I think we need to go further. I think we need to push harder. So he was actually, from someone who was blocking us to then somebody who was pulling us and stretching us. And he was actually stretching us to say, we need to go further than this. And we were like, fantastic. So we then pushed him further to try and get more in line with our national competitors, but also give him the tools, the resources to then go international and say, this is what we're doing in the UK and Ireland. This is what we should be doing internationally, to the point where he was the champion and he was pulling things, not just at a national level, but at an international level, and starting to raise the bar, which was great for us because it helped build that momentum. We were seen as, the UK and Ireland was seen as the leading country within the Aldi globe. And from that, over the next few years, the topic of science-based targets, it's just exploded within Aldi, and it's very much born out of the situation that I've described. That was the genesis of it, and it was all down to really spending time getting to understand the stakeholders. That was a key to the success. And often the biggest critic, if you can switch them round, because the biggest critic is often very influential, if you can switch them round over a period of however long it takes, they become your biggest champion. And it's just amazing how that happens. So yeah, that's probably the biggest example, Olivia, I've got for you in terms of trying to win round key stakeholders. My career's been peppered with similar examples, not to the same extent and on the same impact, but the same principles have applied and continue to apply.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that that's such a powerful story of that sort of transformation in mindset that you facilitated, and in turn, you know, enabler of, you know, your science-based target and wider ambitions. That's incredible.